Hello everyone, I'm SHENGZHI-Microsoft, a student from the Data Science Master's program in NTU. Today, I'm going to share my hands-on experience with Microsoft Azure Database, covering the process of creation, import, query, and analyze. This is my technical review. My presentation is structured into 7 sections, and let's begin with the first part, Introduction. First, let me introduce Microsoft Azure Database to you. It's a highly powerful cloud computing platform. To be specific, Azure offering over 200 cloud services. This service covers areas including computing, storage, even artificial intelligence. In the field of data science, Azure also provides a wide range of database and analytic tools. We can summarize this with a single equation. Cloud databases plus storage plus analytic tools equals to the entire data science lifecycle on the cloud, from data preparation to the final dissemination. Now, let's go into 3 main types of service Azure offers for data science: database, big data storage, and analytics. When it comes to database services, this includes relational databases like Azure SQL Database, our old friend PGSQL Server, and of course, NoSQL databases like Cosmos DB. When it comes to big data storage, such as Azure Blob Storage for unstructured data, and we also have Data Lake optimized for large-scale data. And finally, as for the big data analytics, Azure Synapse Analytics is an integrated analytics tool, very useful for us, and it's similar to Jupyter Notebooks, making it ideal for us to handling data science problems. Therefore, in my following practical demonstration, I'll be using these 3 core services: Azure SQL Database, Blob Storage for file storage, and finally, Synapse Notebooks for data analysis. This is what I like to call 3 wishes in one go, and the upcoming demonstration will include all of these parts. So let's go to the second part, database creation. Let's create my first Azure SQL DB. So firstly, let me introduce the original data, an international hotel booking analytics from the Kaggle platform. And the dataset is a comprehensive synthetic dataset designed to emulate the booking and review data of a major hotel platform, and includes 3 files: hotel CSV, users CSV, and review CSV. And we can see the diagram without attributes to know the relationship between each other. So finally, we can get the final ER diagram. Using the ER diagram, we can easily find out the restrictions inside each table, helping us design the SQL queries, like the primary key, the foreign key, and the unique ones. So after knowing about the original data, let's sign up an Azure account. We can sign in with a Microsoft account, for example, the NTU provided us. And luckily, NTU student account includes Azure student benefits, such as $200 for all available services. And we can enjoy free credits and free official tutorials on YouTube. Congratulations, you finished the first step. So let's set up the DB. First, we need a SQL server, a logical server. So let's see how to set up it. Well, we just search for SQL servers, and then we can find out that the SQL server logical server is right here. Don't forget to use your student account. And we can set up the region and the name for our servers. For example, we cannot use East US as our location, but we can use East Asia. And then we use SQL authentication and set up the password and account and confirm about that. So next step, we need to make sure about the networking rules. And we will enable that our server can connect to other servers in Azure. And it's a security and additional settings. And the tags will help us easily find out about our service. And finally, we can review all the settings in this page. Well, as for the database setup, the same as before, we create one. And we set up the name and choose the server. And it's very interesting that we can see the cost on this page, and we can choose to change the core of our database. Since it's a student homework, there's no need for us to use so many cores inside, so it's quite expensive. And I've already spent my free credit on the database, so I will not choose to create a new one on these procedures. And when it comes to networking, don't forget to add our local client IP into that, so we can connect to it later. And there's no other additional settings, but if you already have a database, you can use the backup to load the one you used before. And finally, we can review all this on this page. Since we've already set up the DB, so can't wait to test Azure SQL DB queries. First, don't forget to add your IP in that, so you can connect to the DB right now. So we can use the query editors inside the Azure to help us make query easily. So for example, I will test all this right now, like some very easy strategies, like create table, and then we can insert data inside. We can also just query and to select the data. And finally, drop the test table, all down. After testing the queries, it's time for us to create the table schema. Attention, please import the data first, and then create the foreign keys, so that it will improve the efficiency of that. Third, let's talk about data import. We will use Azure Blob Cloud Import and Local Import. So let's see how we import data using the Azure Blob Cloud services. First, we need to create a storage account just like we did before, and we can upload the file over here and click upload, just drag the CSV and all the thing over it. And we can use the SQL database to import the data, create a storage key, and create external data sources to let our SQL DB find the data, and finally using bulk insert to import the CSV. The second method, well, quite traditional, we use PyCharm, connect to Azure SQL Server, and then connect to Azure SQL DB. We import CSV data from local and commit transaction and close our connection. All the thing over. Then, let me introduce the fourth part, query execution, including some basic queries and some more interesting ones. First is the most basic query. We can retrieving a single record in it. We can see the result over here. And then we can also count some basic data of a table. For example, the number of people from different countries. Also, we can do something more interesting. We'll create a new query, and we want to find out the rating patterns of users across different ages. Do older users tend to give stricter ratings, or we can say that lower? Well, we can see that there's little different, but it seems that they do really give the stricter ratings. So after creating the DB and import data and query, is all this finished? Absolutely not. We will go in further to see so many analytic tools inside the Azure platform. Look familiar? The outline of this video, and then we will use Synapse and Azure tools to help us do the analysis on these data. So let's come to the fifth part, going further, doing data analysis based on Azure Cloud Services. So let's conduct a little interesting research on the top 10 keywords for each hotel. First, we need to create a Synapse workspace, like the server and the storage we created before. Then we open the studio, and we can create a new one or use the one we already have. In that, we can see that it's quite similar to Jupyter Notebook, and we can just import the CSV and import the data and clean the data and find out about the 10 keywords. We can see that right now it has meaningless words like just, but we've just finished the first part and the second part. And I suppose in the future we can use other tools like Azure Machine Learning and Analytic Services to make the result much better. Showing all these advantages on Azure, let's talk about some problems I encountered. Of course, nothing is perfect. Well, the first problem I want to talk about is the restriction to student account. It seems like a pay-to-win game. You cannot use the servers in US or even Southeast Asia, but East Asia is okay. As a highly commercialized cloud server, it's reasonable that the range of services you can access is tied to how much you pay. Second, I want to talk about the security and network restrictions. When we import data from local, the Azure said that 1433 is welcome, but NTU Secure Wi-Fi just banned for this. And when you use the phone hotspot, it will change your IP randomly. Therefore, importing data via Azure Blob Storage is often a more stable and convenient solution when you use the cloud service. And the third, of course, there's still little difference from PGSQL and even MySQL. We can see that in PGSQL, it automatically supports Unicode, but in Microsoft Azure SQL DB, you have to use nvarchar to support that. Although Azure SQL DB follows most of the standard SQL syntax, there's still a little difference between the DB we usually set up on our own computers. Also, doing all these things on cloud seems so cool, but when it comes to export document, you want to write that you can export the CSV for me, but sorry, you can't do that in Azure. To export document, you also need to use cloud-based storages, and then download it. Finally, I have to say the most severe challenges for us, migrating DB when tightly bound to one cloud services. And we can see that different cloud providers often have differences in database architecture, like the Azure SQL, permission management, storing method, and API interface. Therefore, once your system depends on a particular cloud service, the cost of switching later is high and flexibility is quite limited. And finally, let's give a final summary of Azure Database. I do really admit that Microsoft Azure is a very useful and powerful computing platform for companies, large projects, or users lacking computing power. However, for small projects or individual users, local environment is more convenient, offering greater flexibility and lower cost. This is why so many major cloud providers, whether for databases or cloud storage, offer generous free trials and credits, allowing us to accumulate data while becoming familiar with the platform. But once you fully invested yourself in it, it's hard to turn back. Therefore, when undertaking personal projects or small experiments in the future, it's important to weigh the dependency and migration costs of the data service. While enjoying the convenience of the cloud, we should also consider the flexibility and the cost effectiveness of local solutions. And that's all for my technical review to Microsoft Azure Database. Create, import, query, and analyze. Thank you very much.